Luka Doncic, after having an electrifying rookie year and then immediately making the superstar leap in his sophomore season, a lot of people started to put him in the potential GOAT conversation, guys who could realistically achieve GOAT status when there are very few players that you can put that kind of projection onto. But now, 6 years into his NBA career, he is at the age of 25, and there's definitely room for him to achieve more, and whether or not the GOAT conversation has passed him by is something that I want to discuss in today's video. Hello everybody, welcome to Awesome Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and it makes a massive difference on how this video performs in the YouTube algorithm. So the reason I've been thinking about this is there's been a lot of conversation around Victor Wembanyama specifically and his ability to be the GOAT. And a lot of people have argued, and I agree with this point for the most part, that Victor Wembanyama was almost designed in a lab to be the greatest basketball player there ever was. Like, to have all the skills that he does while being 7'5". Hard to compare that to really anybody else. And that's not a knock on LeBron or Michael Jordan. You're just not 7'5" with guard skills. It's just kind of the way that it is. So for that reason, I was thinking like, well, we're talking about Wemby, but Luka Doncic was the guy we were having this conversation with just a few years ago. Have we moved on from that, or is that still something that's reasonable for him to achieve? Now being like 6 years into his NBA career now, he's put up some ridiculous numbers. He is going to be very high on the all-time assist and scoring lists, and there's a decent chance he'll be pretty freaking high on the rebounding list too, because he's at like 8-9 rebounds a game for most of his career. He's also mega efficient, just one of the most unstoppable scorers I've ever seen.
They don't seem to have any answer whatsoever.
Well, they're not the Lone Ranger in that regard. Luka has done this to many teams this year. What?
Got to get it in. Here's Luka. Gets it away. It's good! A Doncic dagger!
Unstoppable playmaker, a generational playmaking talent. He is truly one of the most talented basketball players I've ever laid my two eyes on. So with that in mind, I do think he has the skill set, at least offensively, to get in that conversation, which does bring you to the defense, which is something that is interesting about him, because I think it's partially the era he's in where we don't really value defense in the same way that we did in the past when evaluating these all-time greats, but it is something that will come up. And I think Luka and his bad defense, I don't think he was ever a terrible defender, and he was only a bad defender for a small stretch of time, but he's definitely not a strong, huge, major positive defender by any means. You can definitely say that's the case for a lot of all-time greats, for a lot of GOAT candidates, at least at the peak of their career. You know, LeBron kind of stopped playing defense for certain years of his career, but for the best of them, he was one of the best defenders in the entire NBA. Michael Jordan, one of the best guard defenders of all time, if not the best. Just having that aspect is definitely something that's very limiting to Luka, so that's a factor here. The other thing is, what exactly is he achieving by what age? So he doesn't have a title yet. He doesn't have a Finals MVP yet. That's fine at this stage of his career because not a lot of players get that by the time they're 25. Even Michael Jordan and LeBron James, who I'm going to be referring to throughout this video because they are the two GOATs. Literally, I don't think there's a valid answer besides for those two. In order to get into that conversation, you need to win titles, you need to win MVPs. Michael Jordan and LeBron James did not win their first championship until they were 27 years old after many years in the NBA, and Luka has had those same many years and has, if anything, been reminiscent of what the early years of Michael and LeBron's careers looked like, which was just this freakishly talented young player who's surrounded by not all that much talent. Of course, this year he has Kyrie Irving, and this is the best roster he's ever played with, but up until this year, it's been bad. Jalen Brunson was there, but he wasn't Jalen Brunson in New York, and that was the best he got otherwise. Other than like when Kristaps Porzingis wasn't broken every other couple of months. Otherwise, it's been a pretty piss poor showing from the Mavericks front office, which is exactly what the Bulls were initially, and it's especially what the Cleveland Cavaliers were with their first stint with LeBron. You just hope it doesn't bleed over as long as it did with LeBron, or in the ways that it did, and I think the Mavericks have done a much better job of addressing their future than they were previous. And I just want to acknowledge something here, a take that I routinely have, and I just want to, give myself some credit for Luka being the perfect example of this. and this is tangentially related, and it's also related to Wemby. I have said with Wemby and with the Spurs, whenever you have someone like Wemby, you need to go all in immediately. Like literally as fast as you can conceivably do it without being stupid and short-sighted, you need to make that decision and you need to make it quick. Because look at Luka now. He's a couple of years into his career. It feels like that happened yesterday. It feels like Luka was drafted yesterday. And they just spent a bunch of years fucking dilly-dallying, and now we've arrived to a good roster, which hopefully can keep Luka in Dallas for a long period of time. But either way, the point being, the time frame to actually build around these players, 6 years passes faster than you think. So just a note there about Wemby and his future. But overall, getting back to Luka, he's had a similar context to his career of the two GOATs. He has had no championship to this point, but the difference is he also doesn't have an MVP, and he doesn't have a very signature, clear MVP season. Like LeBron had 2009, Jordan had, it was either 88 or 87, maybe it was 89, but the year where he averaged like 37, 7 and 5 and like 2 steals and a block, and he was above average efficiency versus the entire league. The Bulls won like 50 games. Luka doesn't have a season quite like that, does not have that MVP. Now maybe he gets that MVP this year, because as we're going to discuss, I don't know if this video first or later, but there's going to be a discussion about Luka and Jokic, because they're pretty much the final 2 candidates for MVP at this point. We've decided to whittle it down to that. Maybe he gets it this year, and he's averaging 36, 9 and 9 on plus fucking 8 true shooting percentage versus the rest of the league. So very, very good numbers, and the Mavericks have been moving up the standings. I actually want to give credit to Rudy, because this is a point that he made in our MVP discussion video of like, what if Luka just jumped the standings? And the Mavericks have just been winning nonstop, and they've been jumping the standings, and looks more and more likely like Luka could win this MVP. But either way, Michael Jordan and LeBron both had 2 MVPs before they were 27, if I'm remembering that correctly. Luka doesn't have one currently. Now, he could win it this year, or he could win it in the next 2 years to match them, but he doesn't have that yet. Also has to rack up the championships. How confident are we that he can do that, especially in the Western Conference with Wemby trailing him? Because the big part about being the GOAT is that you have to be better than everybody, and if Wemby is better than you, you're definitely not going to be the GOAT. And if he has better teams than you and they consistently beat you, and he ends up winning those championships instead of you, well, then Victor is ultimately going to end up being the one that is propped up, not Luka. It's a tricky situation, and I feel like in the NBA, the idea of a dynasty or just winning multiple championships in a row is becoming less and less common. The last 5 NBA champions have all been non-repeat champions. It's been a new team every single year, and I think that's kind of just the way that the game is going. That's how things are now, I guess, for better or worse, is there's just more competition at the bottom of the league, which means it's harder to be one of the top dogs at the top of the league. And it just means that racking up 4 to 6 championships, not as likely, not as easy. There is also the factor of longevity. You either have to do what Michael Jordan did, which is just do a whole lot of shit in a 12-year span, or you have to do what LeBron did and just play a comically large amount of time. Now, Luka has actually been mostly an Iron Man throughout his career. Like, he's not like a guaranteed 80-plus games every season guy, but he's pretty good about playing most of the year. And I have no concern about, like, athletically there being much of a decline, because Luka's skill set athletically is really just more in how he uses his body paired with his mental fortitude, because like the stopping and going and all that, that's a part of physical athleticism, but it's also that he knows when, like in here, not in his legs, when to stop and start and all that. And even if he's a little bit slower, even if he can't jump as high, he's probably going to be just as devastatingly effective. That's his whole shtick. So I'm not worried about injuries making him a worse player, and I'm not really too concerned about them shortening his career, but there's a difference between not having your career shortened and playing as long as LeBron did. So that's another thing that would be rather difficult to achieve. So the odds are definitely stacked against him, as they kind of are in the GOAT debate pretty much always. So I would just say, in conclusion, for Luka's place in this conversation for being a potential GOAT in the future, that he has not necessarily done a lot to propel his case that he could have otherwise. Like if he had an MVP earlier, if he went further than just a Western Conference Finals appearance, maybe that could prop him up a little bit more. But he also has not like dug himself in a hole. He's pretty much at a neutral point where he can go either way, and it's on both him to do that and then the Dallas Mavericks organization to put those pieces around him, or for him to go somewhere else for them to do that. It's also just a matter of the landscape of the NBA at large. I just don't know that the crazy stacked resume of Michael Jordan or LeBron James is as achievable as it used to be, not because the talent isn't there, but precisely because the talent is there everywhere else. And that's not me knocking the level of competition that they had, because I think that's all valid. I think it's all within its own context, and that's fine. The NBA is undeniably absurdly talented right now, to the point that people are having conversations about there being an expansion just so that we can level this out a little bit. I do think that Luka can still be the GOAT, but Wemby is probably going to be right on his trail. And honestly, I think this is perfect for the NBA's future, because the fact that we have two guys who realistically can get themselves in that conversation, that is very interesting. And I don't know, it's probably been a while since we've had two guys. I mean, technically there's never been a time where two guys were like a true GOAT candidate, but like LeBron and Steph is the last time we've had two like top 10 players of all time going back and forth. And I think after this, Luka and Wemby are going to be doing that. In the Western Conference Finals, I think we are going to get Spurs versus Mavericks a couple of times. Maybe Luka goes over the East and decides to dominate the East as Michael Jordan and LeBron James did, and they can meet in the finals. Whatever it may be, there's been a lot of discussion about rivalries in the future of the NBA and what that might look like. I think Luka versus Wemby will be a very interesting thing to track throughout the years. Even though they're different positions and very different players, they will probably be the two best players in the league for a very long stretch of time, and it's really just going to come down to who can accumulate more titles and MVPs and all that to see who actually ends up getting the closest to being the GOAT, if not actually just outright achieving it. With that said, shout out to Nick for editing this video. Let me know what you think about Luka and the GOAT debate in the comment section below. But that is it. Goodbye.